Hi, this is Dr. Schulman, and we're going to be doing special education today. This is math for teachers. This one took me a while to build because, to be perfectly honest, when I first started teaching, I hated having co-teachers, special education teachers in my classroom. I felt like they were just a distraction. A lot of them told me they do not know math, or teacher aides, they say they don't know math. And I just always felt like they were a distraction to my class. When I had like over 30 in a classroom, um, it was so hard to keep them all together and like on task. And obviously I was a new teacher, I was struggling. Um, but I would just tell them, like, you can go sit in the corner, you don't have to come, you can work on your individual education plans or IEPs or their 504s, and I've got this. And they loved it. A lot of them are just so happy to just get out of the math classroom. One teacher really changed how I felt about it, and she was willing to not only, you know, want to learn the math, like the students. So I helped her after school, and she taught a bunch of the lessons, and it was so powerful. She taught me a lot about special education, and I was able to teach her some about mathematics. And it was really good. And she actually proofread this entire assessment, and she told me all the spots that I messed up because I've taken a lot of special education courses. For my second license, my special license, it's for students who English is their second language. But I do have my second licensure is special, it's termed special for special education. So we'll get into it. I'll share my screen, but I have to give props to that educator because she helped me so much in my thinking about students with special needs as well as because I always just thought good teaching, differentiate, doesn't matter how high or low you are, but there's so much more. There's so much more, whether it's not looking students in the eye that are on the spectrum to going down on somebody's level who is in a wheelchair to talk to them. I have had a lot of students with mobility issues who've been in chairs, and I've always tried to do different things, whether that is making sure there's a space for them, easy to get in, easy to get out of the classroom. Every time I spoke to them, I was never looking down to them. I'd always like kneel or sit down before I gave them like the instructions. Even I've had a nonverbal student, and so he's struggling with nonverbal, but I let him participate by always calling on him for single things like what's 5 to the 0 power. He was able to say one, he was able to say zero. So the small words he could say, I would still always call on him to have him participate. That's just little personal stuff, and why I think this one's so important. So I'm going to share my screen. If you have questions about this, obviously feel free to um, just reach out to me. I've got a lot more experiences and things like that to help. And oh, that's strange. If you need my help, I'm always here. So again, this is going to be the information on special education. The last few are all 18 points because there's a lot. So let's get into it. All right. Now we're going to start with how prevalent the populations are and how much they've been pushed into regular classrooms. A lot of times these students were not in your classroom, now they are. So you have to work with them. So my stats might be a little old, but they're as current as when I wrote this whole thing. So they're not too far off, depending on when you're watching this. According to reports of Education Weekly, I've got the actual reports. The percentage of students with special needs have increased over the past decade from 12.9% or 6.4 million from the ages 3 to 21 to 7.3 or 14.7% by 2021, 2022. Now, this is not nearly as big of a growth as working with students where English is their second language, but you can see the growth is happening. These numbers vary state by state. New York is, but in New York, the amount of students with individual education plans, and this is exactly what it is, if you want to know what it is, or 504 plans, if you really, and I'll go over them, but if you've never seen them before, we'll go over them here. There's 20% in New York. So whatever school or class you'll be teaching in, you'll most likely be working with some students who have special needs. The majority of students with disabilities that you're working with will have a combination of inclusion. What is inclusion? That means, and you can watch this, it's really good if you want to watch the video. So inclusion means they're pushed into your classroom. So they have skills-based resource classes. So they go to a room for special ed like a couple periods a day, but then they're in regular classes. So they work with other students with similar abilities with a special education teacher. So, but they also are in your classes. And then there's self-contained classes, which are typically reserved for sorry, I don't know why that dropped down so far. And there's self-contained classes, which are typically reserved for students that have little to no time in general education classes, or they're only in there for the social skills. The amount of inclusion is increasing. This is, I think, the biggest change and why there's so many more students with special needs in mainstream classrooms. So inclusion is in 2021, 66.5% of students with some form of disability spent 80% of time in mainstream classrooms, which has doubled. So before it was like more than double. So before it was like, I don't know, what is it? From the 90s to here. So 30 years ago, it was about 30%. Now we're over 60%. It's kind of crazy, right? Okay. So there are many good teacher practices for being aware of working with students who have disabilities and other health impairments. For example, instructing students with autism, maintaining eye contact can be difficult. So don't be afraid if they're not looking at you. It's just too much sensory input coming in. So you should not force the issue by making them look directly into your eyes or looking directly at them, as it can cause overstimulation. It's not a sign of disrespect, but a skill you can help them build together over time, as it can be beneficial for them to be able to handle the social cue in the future. So there's way more, but this is the stuff I've used and I found effective. Obviously, this doesn't work for every student, but it definitely helped me. So when working with students in a wheelchair, I would always kneel or sit when talking to them one-on-one for any extended period of time. This signifies you're on their level by not talking down to them. I thought this was really important. When working with students who are hearing impaired, and make sure there's no obstruction to your mouth when you're speaking, as a lot of them read lips and body cues to comprehend. So if you have a student who may have hearing aids or is hearing disabled, definitely make sure they can see your mouth. Changing your mouth or overemphasizing your speech can be unhelpful and disrespectful to these students. They're used to reading lips normally, so if you try to be like really big mouth movements, it could be hard for them. These are just a few examples that I've personally learned during my time in the classroom. Every student is unique and require individual interactions. So just because these three things I found really useful for me, they're not going to work for everybody. And not every student diagnosed with disability is the same, nor should you treat them as such. So ask students how they want to be treated, as their experience should be respected in your classroom. So I would look through your rosters, read the individual education plans, read the 504s, and determine what challenges they may face. So as a math educator, you should know how to effectively teach students with IEPs and 504s and all the accommodations available for helping them be successful in mathematics. So this is just better to help you. I have like some things that I think are really important to know. So it's an introductory set of terms that should help you feel comfortable with working with these students, but they may be outdated when you read this, but I know they've been really useful for me. So what is an IEP, right? This is the biggest thing you're going to be reading. I spelled the word wrong. So an individual education plan, it's a yearly revisited legal document for students that are diagnosed with one of more of these 13 categories. Okay, so these are all the 13 categories. Ta-da. So you've got them. And exactly what they are. So to get an IEP, it has to be one of these 13 things. There's other ones, and that's where 504s come in, but IEP is one of these specific hearing impairment, right? Autism, like it's got to be one of these. All right, and the special needs and disability must affect the student's education in a significant way. As covered by the IDEA, So this is the Individuals with Disability Education Act. These students are required to get additional services for free, and that's the free appropriate of use of public education. Families can also get a free independent educational evaluation to determine eligibility. So let's say at the school it doesn't work for them and they go out and they get an IEE, they could still be eligible. So the accommodations for an individual education plan are generated during a meeting with the student. We got the student there, the student's parent, one of the student's general education teachers, one of the student's special education teachers, a specialist to interpret the results, and a district representative or school administrator. I've always tried to go to as many of these as I could throughout it because they always just need some person that's a general ed teacher. And I was okay being that math teacher there. I know it takes up some of your time, but I think it's really useful. So all these people have to be present at the IEP. When the student turns 18, they get to do it themselves. They don't need the parent there. So the IEP plan is made up of goals for the student that the school will provide, the student's present levels, the students' present levels of academic performances. So whatever tests they've been taking. What else? How long the services are going to get, modifications throughout the plan. So this is a legal document, and accommodations must be followed by all general and special education teachers. Failure to do so may result in the possibility of losing your license. So student has an IEP, make sure you're giving them all their needs. All right, so that was an IEP. What's a 504? So 504 is kind of the same, but it's like if the student doesn't have one of these 13 categories, okay? So it helps students that are struggling in school. A 504 plan is to remove barriers to students with disabilities to help them learn alongside peers. This was developed by the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 to stop discrimination against students with disabilities. To qualify for the 504, the student must be diagnosed with a disability. So it's easier to get because it just has to be substantial limitations to activity. So it's learning, reading, communicating, and thinking. And show the disability interferes with the student's ability to learn in a general education classroom. Family can get a free outside evaluation and must pay out of pocket for this. The professionals needed, so the 504 plan's a little different. So it's not a strict, it's not a legal document, but it must include at least one member of these categories. So to talk about the child's abilities and skills. So we need like either a teacher, special education teacher or guidance counselor for the 504. Someone to interpret the results, so school social worker, nurse, or psychologist, and 3 to share the information about the accommodations to meet the school's needs, such as the school administrator or the 504 coordinator. So it's less people needed. It's not legal document, but that's how you make the 504 plan. So there's no standard one. I've got a bunch of samples that you can look at, but it generally just has a combination of services, who is providing the services to make sure it's there. Okay, so inclusive classrooms. So this is probably what you're going to be dealing with the most. So it's designed in which students learn in a general education environment for most of the day. The student is fully integrated in the classroom itself and given the same lessons and activities that are modified and adapted to meet their special needs. There's usually a specialist. So it's either like a teacher aide, special education teacher, someone who's providing that interest as a math educator. Specialists need teachers to come in. Specialists and special education teachers come into the general classroom and provide assistance with minimal disruption to the classroom environment. So if they're coming in, it's usually just to help. So you should think about differentiating, accommodating, and these are the 2 things I always do. Differentiation and accommodation for those students who are in your classroom. You got to pay attention to their unique differences, give them extra time, let them take a test in a different room, all that stuff to make sure they're effective. Okay, so this one I wanted to make sure was here. So working with co-teachers, specialists, and aides, they're all different. They all have different levels of education. So you should ask them what they are and what they're willing to do and what they like. So this is the collaboration with co-teachers. So this is a great article to read for keys to co-teaching in these inclusive classrooms. So this is what you should do. It took me a while to get this right. So take time to plan with these individuals as you should present and united front of the classroom. You don't want them to look at you as the teacher and them as just somebody else. You should both be teachers unified with the shared goal. This was big for me. Special education services begin with planning and using all resources to optimally best suit your needs of the entire class. So a common misunderstanding along with co-teaching is that the special education teacher is just there to monitor or help only the special ed students during that period. When in reality, true co-teaching model should represent both professionals as equals. Be aware that a co-teacher is different from an instructional aide and has higher degree of training. Planning is an important part of providing accommodations, modifications, and resources needed to give students and can be the start of a good working relationship. Instructional aides are not trained in this way, so they're different. And if they're in your classroom, they may require more help and do different roles. They may just help students take notes. They may just be there to like help the student like understand specific things, like help them make sure they're there on time, taking notes for them, make sure they know exactly what's going on for homework. It's different. It's different for every student. So ask your instructional aides what they're confident in and what they want to get out of the professional experience because they could learn a lot just being in your classroom and provide them with opportunities to jump in. This is something I didn't used to do and I had to learn how to do a lot. Special education teachers, on the other hand, should be used as a resource rather than as an aid. Establish a partnership with your special education teachers that can benefit not only your students with special needs, but all your students in your class. They can really help you differentiate. Special education training focuses on differentiation and modification to teaching strategies. They will likely lean on you to be proficient in whatever competent area it is, algebra, the geometry, the calculus, and you should learn to lean on them to incorporate equitable strategies in the class. Do not be afraid to give up the reins and share responsibilities with these professionals in the room. The goal is for your students, not your own pride, right? So this is my experience. I spoke about it in the beginning. If you want to read it, you can. It just talks about how I thought at first their presence was such a distraction in my classroom. And then I learned how better to do it. Since I spoke about it in the beginning, but if you want to read it, you can. It just talks more about my own personal journey with this. All right, so this is the big piece. What do you have to do? Accommodations and modification. What's the difference? What are they? So with the advancements of tech, the amount of accommodations and services students can receive is increasing. So what's the difference? So accommodations is altering the same content to be more inclusive for students with special needs. And modifications is changing the content or material itself or what is expected to be learned. So accommodations could be like giving a student really big text they're struggling seeing the same text or giving them the lecture on audio, right? So it's the same content, just making it more inclusive. So modifications is actually changing it. So this is like I actually put in the words of the guided notes for them for a modification. They only have to take a test with 10 questions instead of 20. That's an accommodation versus a modification. And here's the difference. So they're both designed to promote equity and level the learning experiences for special needs. Work with students directly or consult the IEP or 504 plan to determine what would be most appropriate for students with special needs. Some common accommodations that I would employ are, here it is, use of a calculator, use of a formula sheet, taking the test in an alternate room, having extended time, allowing the use of notes or note cards. Some other common accommodations I would employ during classroom learning include having students have a note taker, providing the lectures digitally or audio, using the Otter AI where I speak and it actually types it out for us. Access to a laptop. This stress pass was great for students who were, anytime it became too stressful, they can walk around the hall. It's their own special pass was great. Providing translucent paper for easier spatial manipulation, using graphic organizers for note taking, like really giving them like great graphic organizers to understand this. Specific note taking graphic organizers was really helpful. This is a good one for algebra. So here are modifications. So this is different. I should probably do this. So some modifications that I would employ in the classroom learning includes cutting down or splitting assignments into more manageable pieces. and providing worked out examples. So logs was super hard, especially for my students with special needs. So I actually gave them specific pages with all the examples worked out. I also use specific leveled activities. So this is the grab bag where, they only had to do the rookie ones as opposed to like the MVP or the All-Star MVP problems. So, oh, sorry. So I go back and forth. So this is just one big paragraph. So, a common accommodation that I would employ for students' homework assignments include intending the time frame, so giving them longer to do homework. A common modification for students' homework include grading for completion instead of for accuracy. So just how many they attempted. So that's just something I'm doing that's different. Or having different amount of problems due to the length of, oh yeah, so some of these are really long. So check this out. So this is a small geometry review. It's only 20 questions. This is a medium geometry review. I think it's like 40 questions. And this is a long geometry review, which is like 120 questions. If you're going to teach geometry, guess what? Short, medium, long. I have the same ones for algebra, so just let me know. But like I would give students different ones. That's a great modification. Like you've got 20 to try, you've got 50 to try, you've got 100 and something to try. As educators, we must attend to a set of accommodations and modifications as requirements to meet the legal documentation of their IEPs. Students with 504s are only legally required to receive accommodations, but not modifications. So you can't change the standards that they're being covered. You can't change the amount of questions on the test. You can just give them help on the test. So that's kind of the difference. Differentiation for level learning is highly suggested for both, but not legally required. All right. The strategies above are just suggestions that I found effective to help students with special needs and differentiate my approach. I believe this is just good teaching, and all students, whether having an IEP or 504, will benefit from some sort of differentiated instruction. Here's 20 ways you could do it. I believe modifying the work to get the most out of your students is the best course of action, whether it is providing students with harder work from years ahead, asking for students to take the lead on content learning. I've totally done that, or giving previous year standards to help students achieve grade level work. So I differentiate all the time. For the students that are really hard, I'll give them knowledge stuff. For the students who really need the help, I'll start them off on middle school stuff if they're in high school. And here's the meetings. So here's the last thing before we get into it. So the most important thing for working with students with disabilities is to provide information about their experience and take their personal experiences into account. So I've always tried to attend these IEP and 504 meetings, take time to plan with other teachers, collaborate with the special education teacher, or just reach out to the family. This will all better inform each other of the progress and current functioning of the student. If you're unable to meet in person, oh yeah, so if I couldn't make it, this is what I'd always do. So when there were the meetings that I had once I couldn't make it because I had to run tutoring, which happens sometimes, or run adult education. So this is something you can do. You can email a set of how the student a descriptive set of how the student is doing your test. So like all their levels, their summative grades, are the accommodation modifications working? What should be added, changed, or eliminated? So I take my time and write them a good paragraph. I always just want to communicate. So communication transparency is imperative, and sharing with your students what they plan is for success. So what's something you should really remember? You want them to have a positive experience. School's hard for these kids. Our job is to make it better. So remember that positive feedback is data as well. So I don't always just try to say the things that the student's doing bad. I'm always like, this student always tries to participate, or this student's always on time, or this student always puts in effort, or this student did really well on the specific homework. I'm always highlighting what they do well and share. So you want to share the good stuff as well as the struggles. So if it's working for you, let's say the guided notes or the worked out examples really work well in your class, that could definitely be useful for other teachers, as well as help the students see that, build their math identity, like they feel like they're good at the class. So as a math educator, you can sense what is working, what can be changed to better assist your student. For example, changing seats or recommending after school tutoring. You can also learn from other teachers on what is working in their classrooms and use it in your own. I steal stuff all the time. I definitely steal stuff all the time. So this is what you get to do, which is great. So after learning more about working with students with disabilities, you're challenged with select and review. Both you get to do a sample IEP plan and a 504 plan. Isn't that great? So after reading and reviewing the documents, you will determine how you will add these modifications or accommodations into your classroom. I want you to reference some journals or other publications. So it'd be great to like actually have a resource. There's tons above you can use, or you can use an actual Q1 or Q2 journal. Use Scrumaggio, make sure it's a good journal. And in addition, the assessment should be an APA style. So utilize the prompts below to help you. So this is what you have to do. And I think this is one of the stronger ones that I put together. So explain your perspective. So what do you think about working with students with disabilities? What do you believe is the most important aspects of teaching students with special needs? What are your challenges? So what do you really think are the challenges that are going to be? What's your plan to differentiate while keeping the course equitable and fair? And how do you plan to address the differences in the class in order to not out the students? What does that mean? If your student's ashamed and they don't want to take the test in a different room, right? But they don't want to be outed for having to do it, work with them. So what I've done before, here's another thing. I didn't write it, but there's just something I did. I let them sit and look through the test while everybody was taking the test, and then they could do it during their lunchtime or they could do it after school. So they could still have that specific space that's all quiet for them, but they didn't actually have to be outed by leaving the room to do the special to go into the special education room and take their test. That's one way I didn't out my student. All right, so the next piece is co-teachers. So to define the role of co-teacher in an inclusive classroom, what are the responsibilities in your classroom and how are you going to encourage it? Describe your approach to working with co-teachers and building a specific relationship. Explain the potential benefits and challenges. Define a plan for providing reciprocal feedback between the co-teacher and yourself, right? And what do you hope to learn from this professional relationship? What actions can you take to facilitate their learning? So I think all this stuff is really important, right? So what do you think? How are you going to build this relationship and what can you do with it? So here we go. For the individual education plan, it starts at grade 7. I know it's for elementary school right now, but these are the ones I found. So I've got grade 7 through grade 12. So define an individual education plan. Select an IEP sample from below based on the age and the disability that you foresee yourself working with or you're most interested. So even if so one or the other. So let's say you really want to know how to work with the students with emotional behavior disability. Look at the grade 9 one. Let's say you really want to work with 7th graders, so do the ADHD one. Let's say you're really curious about working with students with Down syndrome. How can you do it? And here's a whole database of them for autism, speech impairment, deaf, hard of hearing, language impairment, learning disabilities, behavioral disabilities, and multiple disabilities. So here's a whole database from Ontario that I was able to find. Let's just pick a random one and look through it. Here's the IEP. Everything was deleted, with the student's information. This is the purpose of it. This is the review of it. This is when it happened. This is everybody who was there. And you always have to sign this. If you have questions, you email this person. This is the plan. This is to contact them. And then we get into it. This is a grade 9, 15-year-old student with emotional disability. The guardians, English. And these are the participants again. And here we go. The strengths of the students when motivated, works hard to complete the work. The results of the student's performance. So they're going to be taking the high school placement exam at the sophomore year. The communication of the student, there's none of that. Do they need technology? No, there's none of that. In the case of a student whose behavior impedes his or her learning or that of others, consider what appropriate strategies, including the positive behavioral intervention strategies to address that behavior. So the structured learning team develops the interventions to address behavioral deficits. Are there problems with English? Nope. What other things? Do they have blind or visual impairment? They have prescription glasses. At this time, they do not wear reading glasses in school. Okay, so this is the part, like this is all like kind of the pieces. I've looked through tons of these, so they all kind of look a little bit the same because it's like the same legal document, right? It goes with communication, seeing, reading, technology. That's kind of the big pieces. And then here is where you put all the pieces in, right? So this is the present levels of education performance. So here's the social emotional, there's academic, and that's pretty much it. And then this is secondary transition pieces and the goals, but I'll keep going. So the person continues to struggle with staff requests or directions. They will always say no or shake their head to communicate that they do not want the staff asking after the initial refusal to comply. It's 5 out of 10, 50% of the time. Doing a good job of frustration and conflict without aggression, comes to staff and asks for help with a conflict with peer. On 2 occasions, has pushed a chair over in frustration. On both occasions, they eventually picked up the chair and apologized. They've currently resolved conflict without aggression 9 out of 10 times. Reluctant to participate in group activities, prefers to work independently with staff support, participates in groups 3 out of 10 times. So then you see the academics completing 6th grade math, but they're in 9th grade. Was able to do 8 out of 10. Fluency has not been an issue. So they're going to drop one of these skills. Independent completing 6th grade levels with 5 out of 10. Some confidence and often ask for help when they could have solved the problems independently. With minimal help is often confirmed thinking and then goes on to solve the problem. They do the same thing for reading. These are the scores from the exam. This is about writing, and this is their study habits. Independently completing assignments 3 out of 10 times. That's going to be tough. This piece, the secondary transition, and the top tells you what it is. The purpose of transition planning is to develop a coordinated set of activities within results-oriented processes that is focused on improving academic achievement and functional performance of the student in order to facilitate the students' movements from school to post-school activities or post-secondary education training. So obviously, this is usually done when the students are older. But they have all these pieces here. So post-secondary goals, interest in going to college, working as a cop, interest in law enforcement, possibility of FBI, trying to graduate. And here are the measurable annual goals. So the IPs must include a statement of measurable annual goals. So at this year, what should happen? Designed for the student's educational needs that result from the student's ability to enable the student to be involved and make progress in the general education curriculum. In order to be measurable, the goal should include a baseline from and a target to as a unit of measure. So here's the math one. We'll look at the math. Supports and post-secondary goals, yes. By this date, when given 7 problems, they will calculate the problems using a calculator, improving the accuracy from 80% at the 6th grade level to 80% of the 7th grade level. Also, they want the same thing. Okay. Oh yeah, because they want them to go from 6th grade math to 7th grade math. And they're going to do this every quarter. And by this time, when given 7th grade math problems, they will work independently to solve the problem. And they were doing this at 50% in the 6th grade level. They want the word problems to go up to 80% at the 7th grade level. So once you see the goals, right, this should really help you kind of. So you look at the goals, you learn about the kid, you're like, okay, what modifications am I really going to do? What accommodation should I be doing? How could I really be helping the student to achieve? This is their goal. How could I help them achieve this mathematical goal of getting 80% in 7th grade word problems? So all of these are pieces. So they also have goals for the social emotional behavior. You can try this yourself, right? These are also goals you can do, even though you're the math teacher. So when given direction, how can we help the student comply from a 50% rate to an 80% rate? Maybe smaller directions, start small, see where the difficulties lie. These are all pieces you can do. There's a lot of social emotional goals. Um, and this is for work study goals, go from 30% to 80% for working on their own and working with groups. So these are the writing skills. All right, so this is the stuff you got to make sure you account for. So these are the accommodations and modifications that they are required, right? So this is stuff you kind of have to attend to. What you do in your classroom should be kind of helping them get to the goal, but this is kind of like the bare minimums you need to do. So what is the modification or accommodation that student requires in order to help them reach the goal? So here we go. Let's see what these modifications are. These all say as needed. Usually they're specific, but let's see what we got for math. So they get manipulative, so blocks, cubes, and a calculator as needed in all settings. The testing, students may use a print or electronic dictionary thesaurus for writing. For grading, extended time to complete assignments, modified length and or content. For the grading modification, you alter the weight so you can make like the participation higher and the test grades lower for the student. They get an alternative location for the tests. And these are the behavioral ones. So a location to resolve anger and frustration, breaks when available, and an alternative schedule. What else? Are there more? Nope. Okay. So here's the last piece. So this is state or district-wide assessments for student achievement. So they decide which tests the students will take and if they get help on these exams. So here we go. The students taking a high school proficiency exam. Sadly, they took that away in most states, which I could talk about for days on why having state requirements is so useful. So for math, they have to take it and they get accommodations for it. So they get a specific calculator, manipulatives. They don't have to do the level 3. So they only have to do level 2 for proficiency. Okay, interesting. And here's the part. Because this was in Washington. And here are related services. So these are the people who get to come in and help. So in math, they get a para educator or a special education teacher for structured learning teacher, 40 minutes a day, 1 time a day. Oh, and so they get special education. They're in the special education room for the math. So they get specific math 1 time a day. So these are all in the special education room. So they are on the students only mainstream 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if it's a 9-period class day or a 7-period class day, they're only mainstreamed. Oh, well, that's 15 minutes 3 times daily, and this is 5 minutes for study skills. So they're in the general classroom, so that's 40. So 3 periods out of their day, they get special education, which is good. Total minutes per week spent at school is 1,000. Total minutes in the special education series. So they're only in the general education setting 10% of the day. So the students only mainstreamed outside the classroom 10% end of the day, which I think is really interesting. So you're only going to get that student for maybe 1 period a day. They're spending just about all of their time in a specialized classroom. So the student is not mainstreamed. And least restrictive environment. So they're thinking about going to a regular class for least restrictive environment for percentages. Okay. And this is just information where everybody's got assigned. So really think about that student's only going to be in a mainstream classroom 10% of the time. So really, if they're in your class for that 1 period a day, you really have to make sure you're working well with them. Or consider that they did get mainstream for their next year, and this was their old IEP. And how would you work with that student? That one would be tough. Let's just look at an ADHD, another one, just so you could see the difference. I know they all look pretty similar. This is a fake name. Don't worry about it. Everybody can fill them out a little different way. Language ability is functioning below his chronological age in the area of receptive development. These are the present levels. And I'm looking for, so he has ADHD, which impacts his learning. See the health file. Okay. Okay. Here's a long-term outcomes. Let's look at the goals. Improve writing strategies, improve math computations on quiz and tests that happen quarterly. Okay. Improve the study habits, get more organized. The short-term goals are necessary behaviors and expectations that will lead to self-growth. So these are the social emotional ones. And let's look at the modifications. So this student gets in-school counseling 1 time a week. That's nice. They get extra time between classes. They get a calculator and they get a modified curriculum. Does not get assisted technology. Okay. Time and a half on standardized tests, double time to complete classroom tests, um, test in a small separate location, administered with minimal distractions. And this is participation in general education classes. Okay, so this one is a lot less detailed, which is fine. I'm just looking at some of these. So here's another one, another sample. So you can see that they're all a little bit different. These are everybody who's attending it. These are the student needs. Raise spelling scores to 80% a week. No testing accommodations at that time. So this one's pretty straightforward and simple. I got them from different states, so you can really see how this works. So this one, well, one was in Washington, one was in Tennessee. Um, this one's good. So it's working significantly below grade level. They got from a 65 to a 70, grade equivalently. So Rosia was at a four between four and fifth, but now she's at fifth grade. So this is everything about math. I like the ones that are actually worked out in the formula. So here we go. These are the actual intelligence tests they took. And I like that they have the source of information for the test for everything. So all this stuff is pretty useful. I would look at them, see all the pieces, and just be like, okay, this how would I work with this kid? After reading about this, what would I do? What accommodations would I put in place for that student to be successful? And I should show you the database. Sweet. So this one is great. It's got all these IEPs and PDFs, and they've got a different one for each of them, which I think is really good. So let's say you had a student with that was deaf or hard of hearing impaired, full sample right here. So the student gets a modified sound, hush ups on chairs, individual or quiet settings. So this is just all this great stuff. So here's a big database of them that you can look through and read through and see which one is useful to you. All right, so read the IEP plan all of its parts, provide your overall impression of the student, whatever you think about it, define the disability, right? So if it attention deficit hyperactive disorder, so describe how that would affect a student, explain the student's overall goals and math goals if they have it, describe the student's current level of functioning and math ability, state the accommodations and modifications in the math classroom. How would you ensure that all these accommodations and modifications are met? Do you agree with them? Right? Like I always think that I don't always disagree, but I think that they could be better sometimes. Is it too much assistance or not enough? How would you alter or modify the accommodations to best meet your students' needs? It could be modifications too. If you were in the room during the creation of this plan, what would you bring up? Right? What do you think is missing? What do you wish was talked about? And what is your overall impressions of an IEP after reading the plan? What do you think about one of these? Doesn't matter which one you look at, right? Um, could be this other health impairment one. You can look at this whole thing and be like, man, I wish they went over this, right? I wish that they had this piece in here. I wish the modifications were different. I wish they brought up this for the student. I wish Jimmy, I think 85% success over 2 weeks for 10 math problems. I feel like we should be pushing the student a little bit more, right? I feel like the student should be in the mainstream classroom more, right? It depends what you think. Depends really what you think will be the most useful for this student. Okay, so that's what you have to do for this one. Now you get to look at some 504s. And I've got some grade 4, grade 5 here. I try to go as young as I could. It was just harder to find them for like third grade. So define what a 504 plan and how is it different from an IEP? Select the sample 504 plan below or one of the lists based on age or disability of the student you foresee yourself working with. So couldn't really find any older ones, but I got grades 4 through 7. So let's look at one for ADHD or for blindness, grade 7. This one has 2. Yeah, we got 2 here. Nice. I love when you get 2. So that's one has 2. We can go to the first one. Notice that these are all different because there's not a specific one. How do I make this nice and big? You're not gonna let me download it, are you? Sorry about that. Or maybe I just open it in a new tab. Yeah, here we go. It's a little blurry. So area of educational needs, work completion, organization, behavioral, and attention, and test taking. What's the specific accommodation? Notice that there's no modifications here because you're not supposed to, for 504s, you're just supposed to accommodate. Sign a buddy to work with a student at the end of the day to make sure all needed materials and books are brought home. So get a student buddy. Isn't that nice? Every day, 10 minutes before the end of the school day. Preferential teaching for the inattention. Have the students sit in or near the front of the classroom away from the door. So the teacher does that daily. Provide a quiet area to do work. So this one I like. Area of education needs, accommodations, person responsible, and the frequency of implementation. Oh, okay. So I found one that was best organized. Oh, this one looks nice. Oh, this sample does look really nice. All right, and then we got our 7th grader with ADHD. This is the plan. This one's going to be reviewed. These are the people who were there. Here's the support. You must watch this 3-minute video. What is ADHD? That's great. Here's the template. So we got organization, distractibility, and impulsivity. Give agreed upon signals for reminding the students to raise hand before answering as needed. Nice. For organization, provide an extra set of books to keep at home. I like these. So this one I think is great. Very straightforward, 504. And then I've got the comprehensive list of all 30 disabilities. So their definitions, accommodations for them. The resource also breaks down the difference between accommodations, the same material, but presented in an altered, equitable way, and modifications changes what is taught. So these are, it's a great guide for all of the accommodations for 504s and how to write a plan and resources and possible accommodations for ADHD. And we've got AIDS, we've got allergies, and it goes on and on and on and on. So this one's great. So read the 504 and all of its parts, define the disability you selected, explain the educational needs presented by the disability, describe a set of accommodations, explain how you would incorporate these into your math classroom. What elements do you think should be added or taken away? create an inclusive class? Do you believe more or less should be done for the student? Is it too much assistance, not enough? How would you modify these? If you were in the room during the creation of this plan, what would you bring up? And what are your impressions of 504s? So I was just like, what do you think about 504s? What do you think about IEPs after actually really going in depth through one of them? Finally, your reflection, is what you learn about working with students with disabilities. What do you still have questions about for working with students? Has your plan to set up your classroom norms changed? Right? Like if you're deciding to set up your classroom, has that changed after working with this? And then the important stuff for me, if you were going to teach somebody about working with students with special needs, how would you do it? So what are ways to make this assessment better? And if you were to make this for pre-service teachers, what would it look like? These are the principles that I think this covers. And these are the in-test standards. And here's the rubric. So how does the rubric work? We have the introduction, co-teachers, IEPs, 504s, reflection, and formatting. So that's 18 points I'm going to divvy up. Intro is clear, and you can grade yourself too. So a clear description of working with students with special needs, a detailed approach, meeting the challenges of working with this population and setting up a fair classroom, clear definition of the roles and responsibilities of a co-teacher, a detailed plan for working with co-teachers to get the most out of the relationship. For the IEPs, it's like, give a clear recount of the IEP plan. What's the student's goals, current levels of functions and accommodations, and how would you employ these in your classroom through impressions of IEPs in general? Included on how to employ accommodations and modifications. And a thorough impression of IEPs in general. So 504 plan is kind of the same way. So first, what's the differences between the two? A detailed definition of the disability, right? The accommodations for the student, and how would you do this? How would you employ these accommodations? Reflect on this metacognitively. What's your reaction to the assessment? Be clear and precise, thoughtful recommendations to make this better. And finally, was this formatted correctly? No spelling errors, word choice mistakes, or grammatical inconsistencies. So here's the rubric for special education. I know this was a really long one. I hope it was useful for you. I found this a big area of growth that I needed in my own professional development. So I hope it was useful. Let me know if it's good. What would you wish to see were better? If you wanted more, I really tried hard to find as many different types of IEPs and sample 504s. I know it's not the biggest list, but I tried my best. I know that's a place that I'm still looking and still trying to find more resources for you. And have a great day.